Little Southside girls do not have four-star generals for fathers. Stop pretending you are something you are not. With those cold words. Mrs. Deborah Sullivan snatched the handwritten essay from Aaliyah Washington's hands and tore it straight down the middle. The sharp rip echoing across the silent classroom. Paper scraps fell onto the child's worn black shoes, and the room watched as a 10-year-old girl stood frozen in humiliation while her story, her truth, was destroyed in front of her. The shock hit her so hard she could not breathe for a moment, and her eyes burned as the pieces of her pride drifted to the floor like ash. Aaliyah tried to swallow her pain, but every child in the room saw her struggle to hold her dignity together in the face of an adult who treated her not as a student, but as a suspect. And in that instant, though Sullivan did not know it, the act of tearing that essay would become the first rip in her own career. A tear that would widen into a scandal so large it would end everything she had built over 22 years. Because the world was about to see exactly what she had done. And the consequences would fall as fast and as hard as the shredded paper at Aaliyah's feet. Before we continue this story, please take a moment to tell me where you are watching from. Subscribe to the channel, and give this video a like so more people can hear stories that remind us why truth, dignity, and justice matter in our schools. Aaliyah Washington had walked into room 212 that morning with her shoulders straight and her hopes high, holding the essay she had rewritten 3 times to make it perfect for Parent Career Day. It was her chance to honor her father, a man she rarely spoke about in public because military security required their family to keep a low profile. Her father, General Marcus Washington, was one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Air Force. Yet on school forms, he was listed only as a government employee. And Aaliyah had learned early in life that the world often doubted children who came from families like hers. Still, she believed her words would stand on their own. She believed her teacher would listen. But as soon as Sullivan took the essay from her hands, the tension in the room shifted. The teacher's face tightened with suspicion long before the young girl even began reading. In an instant, the pride Aaliyah carried into the room collided with the hardened doubts of an adult who had already decided the truth could not come from a child like her. The morning had been filled with presentations, parents in suits, parents in scrubs, parents still wearing janitorial uniforms from their overnight shifts, a room full of stories, a room full of lives, when Aaliyah stood to speak. Her thin uniform shirt pressed neatly into the waistband of her faded skirt. She held her page with both hands, careful not to wrinkle a single corner. Her voice was soft at first, then grew steadier as she read about her father's 28 years of service. She described his 5 deployments, his leadership during dangerous operations, his belief in serving with honor. She had practiced every syllable with her mother the night before. But when she reached the words, 4-star general, Sullivan's hand shot forward. Her voice rose so sharply it made several children flinch. She accused Aaliyah of plagiarism. She accused her of invention. She accused her of lying for attention. Then she tore the essay apart while the entire class watched a child's truth crumble under the weight of an adult's prejudice. The classroom fell into a painful silence, broken only by the sound of a single breath catching in Aaliyah's throat. She did not protest. She did not shout. She simply stared at the scattered pieces of her work, trying to understand why her honesty had been treated as an offense. Her best friend, Caden Patel, stood in a flash of courage and said she was telling the truth. He had seen pictures of her father in uniform, but Sullivan dismissed him instantly and ordered him to the office for defending a lie. The humiliation spread as classmates whispered. Logan Pierce smirked from the back row, pleased to see Aaliyah crushed. Even students who wanted to help stayed silent, afraid of the consequences of challenging a teacher who had long been known for harsh discipline disguised as high standards. What no one realized, except the quiet parent sitting in the 3rd row, Was that the entire incident was being recorded? Mrs. Aisha Khan, who had come simply to watch her daughter and support the class, felt her chest tighten when she saw the cruelty unfolding. As a mother, she recognized the look in Alia's eyes, a look that showed a child trying not to break under the judgment of an adult. She raised her phone discreetly and pressed record, capturing every word, every insult, every tear. She knew this moment was wrong, and she knew the world needed to see it. Alia tried to steady her voice long enough to whisper that her father would be arriving later. She said he would explain everything, but Sullivan waved her off with a dismissive gesture. "Generals do not raise children in places like this," she said, "and they do not send them to public schools on the South Side." The words carried a sting deeper than the torn paper. They struck at the heart of who Alia was. They struck at the dignity of her entire family. And the cold certainty in Sullivan's tone told the room that she was not attacking a child's essay. She was attacking a child's identity. Yet beneath the shame, something stronger began to rise inside Alia. She remembered her father's advice. If someone questions your truth, hold it steady. Truth does not bend for those who refuse to see it. She wiped her eyes quietly. She picked up the torn pieces. She held them in her hands like fragile proof of everything she knew was real. Her classmates watched her silence, some unsure, others deeply moved. Even Sofia Herrera, who rarely spoke up, reached a small hand toward her in silent solidarity. What Sullivan did not realize was that the world was changing in real time. The video Mrs. Khan recorded would leave the building within minutes. It would spread across Chicago within the hour. It would carry the sound of tearing paper into millions of homes. And by the time General Marcus Washington stepped onto the school grounds in full-dress blues later that day, the story of what happened in room 212 would already be reverberating across the country. A career built on 2 decades of teaching would begin to collapse under the weight of a single moment of bias, captured in a video that would not be forgotten. The morning before Career Day began with a sense of hope in the Washington home, a small 8th-floor apartment near Rush University Medical Center, where discipline, love, and quiet sacrifice held the family together more tightly than the walls around them. Alia rose early, her small frame wrapped in a blanket, her cornrows slightly undone from sleep. She walked into the kitchen expecting to see her mother returning from the hospital. But instead she found her father standing at the stove in a casual Georgetown hoodie, stirring eggs as if he had never spent a day on a battlefield. General Marcus Washington had landed hours earlier from a Pacific Strategy conference, quietly slipping into the apartment without waking anyone. He wanted this morning with his daughter. He wanted to remind her that even with the weight of 4 stars on his shoulders, he was still the same man who knelt next to her during spelling tests and helped her steady her hands when she learned to ride her bike. What he did not tell her was that he had barely slept. Memories of explosions in Kabul had shaken him awake more than once during the night, flashes of fear passing through him like sudden storms. But he hid them with practiced strength because he believed a father should shield his child from burdens she could not yet understand. Dr. Naomi Washington entered the kitchen still in her light blue hospital scrubs. She placed her stethoscope on the counter and kissed her husband's cheek, grateful that he was home, if only for a brief window of time. She watched Alia sit at the small wooden table, smoothing the edges of her essay for the 10th time. Naomi had read it the night before. She knew every sentence came from their daughter's heart, not from research pages or scripts. She knew the pride Alia carried was quiet, genuine, and fragile. That fragility was what worried her. Working in a hospital had taught Naomi that the world did not always believe black children, even when they spoke plain truth. She saw it every week in the emergency room, where their reports of pain were dismissed or questioned. She feared that her daughter, too, would face disbelief before she even finished elementary school. She poured coffee for herself and her husband, letting its warmth steady her before the long shift ahead. She listened as Aaliyah asked the question she was almost afraid to ask. "Dad, will you wear your uniform to school?" Her voice held a blend of hope and uncertainty, as if she already suspected the answer would disappoint her. General Washington set down the spatula and knelt beside her chair. His posture was gentle, but his eyes carried the gravity of a man who had spent nearly 3 decades defending a country that did not always defend children who looked like his own. He told her he would be there, but in civilian clothes. Security protocols required it. High-ranking officers who traveled frequently, especially those involved in strategic operations, had to maintain a low profile. Identifying oneself too openly created risk for the entire family. Marcus saw disappointment flicker across his daughter's face, a shadow that disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. He reminded her that strength was not in the uniform. Strength was in truth. Strength was in character. Strength was in knowing who you are even when others cannot see it. Aaliyah looked down at her hands. They were small, but steady. She whispered that Logan's father always talked about meeting senators and drafting bills. She said other parents arrived in expensive suits and fancy coats. She said some children already believed she was lying because she did not dress like the daughter of a general. The words struck her parents with quiet force. Naomi placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder and reminded her that clothing did not measure worth. She told her that true dignity comes from the inside, not from the fabric on her back. Marcus added softly that there were only about 35 4-star generals in the entire nation, and most people would never meet one in their lifetime. He said disbelief was expected, but he urged her never to shrink herself to protect the comfort of others. The family ate breakfast together, though none of them touched much food. The apartment felt smaller than usual, as if the weight of the day ahead pressed against each wall. The morning soon turned to routine. Naomi grabbed her coat for her shift at the hospital. Marcus checked the time and confirmed his briefing would end before 10:30, allowing him to surprise his daughter by arriving right before her presentation. He had planned the timing carefully. He wanted to see her face when he stepped into the room. He wanted the class to hear the pride in his voice when he said she had told the truth. He knew that the military life, with its relocations and secrecy, often made school difficult for her. He hoped this day would be different. He hoped it would be the first time she could speak about him openly without fear of ridicule. Aaliyah packed her essay into a thin folder, slipping it gently between 2 sheets of construction paper so the edges would not crumple. She placed her notebook, pencils, and lunchbox into her backpack. She looked at her drawing taped to the fridge, her father in full-dress blues. It was the picture she never showed at school. She touched the corner of the drawing, then let her hand fall away as if releasing something she wished she could hold. She kissed her mother goodbye and hugged her father tightly, feeling the steady beat of his heart, a sound that calmed her every morning he was home. He cupped her face and told her to be brave. She nodded. The air outside was sharp with October wind as she rode her bike toward Washington Elementary. She carried herself with a mix of anticipation and determination. She rehearsed her opening line under her breath, imagining her classmates listening respectfully, imagining her teacher praising her effort, imagining pride where she would soon find disbelief. When she arrived, several kids were already whispering. The class group chat had filled with teasing messages. One said she was pretending again. Another asked if she would read another fantasy. She tried to ignore them. She tried to focus on her father's promise. But the doubt around her was heavy, and she felt it pressing against her confidence with every step she took. Still, she walked into the building with her head high. She believed in her father. She believed in her story. She believed the truth would speak for itself. And she had no way of knowing that by the end of the day. The truth she carried so carefully would provoke a storm that would shake the school, the district, and the lives of everyone who had doubted her. She had no way of knowing that her father's arrival would not just defend her honor, but expose a wound in the school system that had been ignored for too long. The morning that began with quiet hope would soon end in a confrontation powerful enough to change everything. The tension inside room 212 deepened as parents filled the folding chairs at the back of the classroom, each one ready to hear their children speak about the work that shaped their families' lives. Mr. Victor Lang stood proudly in his expensive gray suit, speaking with confidence about his lobbying work on Capitol Hill, describing policies and committee meetings that few in the room fully understood. His son, Logan, sat upright with a sense of superiority, pleased that his father's title carried weight. Next, Mr. Javier Morales spoke softly about his wife's night shifts as a Capitol janitor. He said she kept the building clean so others could do their jobs without distraction. His humility drew polite nods, but little attention from the teacher who ran the room. Mrs. Deborah Sullivan hovered near the whiteboard, her arms crossed, already impatient for what she assumed would be another uneventful session. Her eyes rested briefly on Aaliyah Washington, who sat with her hands folded tightly around her thin folder. She waited with a mixture of dread and determination, hoping her words would be heard without judgment. But the air in the room felt heavy, as if the truth she carried had no place among the assumptions that had already taken root. When the time came for students to share their essays, Sofia Herrera stepped forward first. She spoke with clarity about her mother's dedication to the school district and the long hours she worked to keep food service areas clean and safe. Sullivan gave her a curt nod and said, "Good," then immediately called the next student. She moved quickly, eager to keep the schedule on track. Then she called Aaliyah's name. Aaliyah rose slowly, her heart beating at a pace she could feel in her hands. She held her essay carefully, as though it were fragile. Her voice shook at first but grew steadier as she described her father's years of service. She spoke of his leadership, his deployments, and the values he taught her, but the moment she reached the words, "4-star general," Sullivan stiffened. Her hand shot forward, stopping the presentation with a command that froze every movement in the room. "Stop right there," she said sharply. Her voice cut through the air with such force that several children looked down at their desks. Then she held up the paper and declared, with a tone that left no room for doubt, "I checked the records. Your father is listed only as a government employee. There is no General Washington living in Chicago. There is no merit in presenting fiction as fact." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing, "This is fabrication. It is unbecoming of a student who should be learning integrity." The accusation struck Aaliyah like a blow. Sullivan's voice carried an edge that suggested she had been waiting for this moment, waiting to confirm her belief that a child from the South Side could not possibly speak truth about something of such magnitude, without hesitation. Sullivan tore the paper again. Even though it had already been shredded earlier, she ripped the remaining section into smaller pieces, dropping them into the trash with a deliberate dismissiveness that stunned the room. The final torn edges fluttered in the air before settling against the cold metal of the wastebasket. The humiliation spread across Aaliyah's expression as she watched her hard work vanish. She stood silent, unable to speak, feeling the eyes of every student on her. The pain was sharp and immediate. It forced her to cling to the only anchor she had left, the memory of her father's voice telling her that truth does not bend for the comfort of those who doubt it. Logan, seeing an opportunity to secure his place at the top of the social hierarchy, leaned back and smirked. He whispered to a friend, loud enough to be heard, she should write fairy tales next time. His mockery fed into the growing tension. A few students laughed under their breath. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. They had seen Sullivan discipline students harshly before. They knew resisting her came with consequences. Yet one voice rose above the silence. Caden Patel stood from his chair, unable to contain the outrage he felt for his friend. His voice trembled, but his conviction did not. "She is telling the truth," he said. "I saw pictures of her father in uniform. She is not lying." He spoke with the courage of someone who believed that fairness was a principle worth defending, even when the cost was high. Sullivan turned on him instantly, her face tightening with irritation. "Enough," she said. "Disruptions are not tolerated. Both of you will go to the office. It is time for a lesson in honesty and consequences." The room fell into a deeper silence. Caden swallowed hard. Realizing he had sacrificed himself for a friend, he refused to watch suffer alone. Aaliyah took a small step forward and whispered, "My father will be here at 10:30. You will see." But Sullivan waved her hand dismissively, as though brushing away an inconvenient breeze. "There will be no more fabrications. Go." Her tone left no room for further discussion. Both children walked out of the classroom, their heads down, their hearts heavy with the weight of disbelief. During recess, the isolation deepened. Children circled Aaliyah with taunts. Some repeated phrases they had heard from older siblings. Others mocked her for claiming something so extraordinary. Project's princess. One student called her, another said she must have copied her story from the internet. Logan took every opportunity to repeat his earlier insult, enjoying the attention it brought him. But not every child joined in the ridicule. Sophia Herrera came to Aaliyah's side, taking her hand in silent support. She said nothing, because she knew words could not undo what had been done, but the gesture offered a small refuge in a sea of hostility. Meanwhile, inside the school building, something else was happening. Mrs. Aisha Khan, who had observed the entire confrontation from the parents' section, had already uploaded the video she recorded. She did so with trembling hands, moved by a sense of responsibility to protect a child who had been wronged. She posted it to her social media account with a simple caption. "A teacher shredded a black girl's essay because she did not believe her father could be a general. Watch and decide for yourself." Within minutes, the video spread far beyond the school walls. It climbed quickly, passed from parent to parent, shared across community pages, and soon reached thousands of people who recognized the quiet brutality of what they witnessed. In less than an hour, the number of views climbed into the tens of thousands. By the time Aaliyah returned to the office to wait for further instruction, the video had already begun to take on a life of its own. Comments poured in. Some expressed outrage. Others questioned how such a moment could happen in an elementary school. Parents across Chicago demanded accountability. Advocacy groups began tagging the district, calling for investigation in one short morning. The injustice committed in room 212 transformed into a digital storm powerful enough to shake the entire school system. And though Aaliyah did not yet know it, she had become the center of a conversation that would reach far beyond the classroom, far beyond the school, and into the heart of a debate about truth, bias, and the dignity every child deserves. Aaliyah sat stiffly in the chair across from Vice Principal Greg Harlan, her hands folded in her lap, her breath shallow, and her heart still aching from the injustice she had endured only minutes earlier. The small office felt colder than the hallway, as if the walls themselves held decades of discipline and warnings. Harlan, a man who had served in administration for over 20 years, leaned back in his chair with a deliberate calm, flipping through her thin student file as though it contained every truth he needed to know. His tone held a practiced softness, but his words carried the weight of assumptions built over a long career. He told her that data showed black students were disciplined at higher rates across the district. He said sometimes, in moments of confusion, children exaggerated or created stories to cope with difficult circumstances. He spoke as though he were offering guidance, but his expression revealed that he had already made up his mind. He tapped his finger against the line on her enrollment form, the one that listed her father as a government employee. He told her that the school relied on clear, verified information. Then he looked up with a faint smile that did not reach his eyes and said that anyone could save a number under the name Dad. The comment felt like a quiet accusation, subtle yet piercing. It sank into her chest, deepening the sense of disbelief she already battled. Aaliyah tried to steady her voice. She told him her father's job could not be listed openly. She explained that high-ranking military work required discretion. She said the truth was simple. Her father would arrive soon and answer any questions. But Harlan offered only a slow shake of his head. His posture was sympathetic, but his tone was dismissive. He reminded her that honesty was the foundation of good character. He said it was better to admit a mistake early, before consequences grew more severe. The message was clear. He expected her to confess to something she had not done. He wanted the situation resolved neatly, without questioning the assumptions adults had made. The pressure weighed on her small shoulders, pressing down until she felt her breath tighten. Then her phone buzzed inside her backpack. She asked if she could read the message. He hesitated but allowed her. When she opened it, she saw the words that lifted her spirit in a single second. Her father had texted, "Briefing running long. I will be there in 15 minutes. Hold strong." The message steadied her. It gave her the courage to stay silent rather than bend under the weight of disbelief. She put the phone away and folded her hands again, waiting for whatever came next. Outside the office, the school's atmosphere shifted rapidly, unseen by the staff, unseen by the administration, unseen even by Aaliyah. A digital storm was forming. The video recorded by Mrs. Aisha Khan spread with astonishing speed across Chicago's social media landscape. It moved from one parent group to another, then into community pages, and soon into local advocacy circles. Within the first hour, it reached 300,000 views. Hashtags began emerging. Hashtag Justice for Aaliyah. Hashtag Chicago Public Schools Bias. Hashtag Believe Black Children. Comments poured in from people across the city, then across the country. Some expressed heartbreak at the sight of a young child being humiliated by an adult who should have protected her. Others shared their own memories of being doubted as children. Still others demanded immediate accountability. Air Force families shared the clip widely, recognizing both the pain of military children who moved frequently and the violation of a teacher publicly dismissing a child's truth. The outrage grew, and with it came questions directed at the Chicago Public Schools District. Parents wanted answers. Teachers wanted clarity. Journalists wanted statements. Inside the building, the administration remained unaware of the scale of the crisis for several more minutes. Vice Principal Harlan continued speaking calmly to Aaliyah about honesty, unaware that the world outside was already preparing to scrutinize every action taken that morning. Meanwhile, on the second floor, teacher Tara Voss posted her thoughts on her personal Facebook page, expressing support for Mrs. Sullivan. She wrote that some children, especially girls from tough areas, make up stories to feel special, and that teachers have a duty to shut down these fantasies before they become disruptions. Her words spread instantly, screenshot and shared by parents who saw the post not as support, but as evidence of deeper bias within the school culture. That post only added fuel to a fire that was already burning fast, and soon it reached the local education reporters who monitored community groups for emerging controversies. In the main office, Principal Karen Novak was reviewing attendance records when her secretary approached with a troubled expression. The secretary held out her phone. She said something was happening online and that Novak needed to see it. Novak reached for the device, pressed play, and watched the video of her teacher tearing up a child's essay while accusing her of lying. She watched it again. then again. Her stomach tightened. She recognized the severity immediately. She recognized the potential consequences. She recognized that this was no longer a simple disciplinary misunderstanding. The video displayed a clear violation of district policy. It displayed possible racial bias. It displayed humiliation of a student in front of peers. It displayed an issue she could not contain. She handed the phone back, stood up, and walked swiftly toward the hallway. She needed to speak with Sullivan. She needed to speak with Harlan. She needed to prepare a response. As she approached the window overlooking the parking lot, her steps halted. 3 black SUVs had just turned into the school driveway. They moved with the precision of a motorcade, steady and deliberate. She recognized them instantly. She had only seen such a formation once before. During an official visit from a high-ranking government official, 2 of the vehicles parked near the entrance. A team of plainclothes Air Force security officers stepped out first, scanning the perimeter with silent professionalism. Then the rear door of the 3rd vehicle opened. A man in full-dress blues stepped onto the pavement, tall, composed, his medals shining in the late morning sun. The 4 stars on his shoulders reflected a quiet authority that needed no introduction. Principal Novak's breath caught. She turned to her secretary and said, "Call Sullivan to the hall. Now." Her voice carried a tone she rarely used, a tone that signaled urgency, gravity, and fear of what was about to unfold. Sullivan arrived moments later, still unaware of the storm waiting outside the building. Novak pointed toward the window. Sullivan looked out, expecting a concerned parent or a district representative. Instead, she saw the unmistakable presence of a 4-star general walking toward the school doors with the calm, unshakable stride of a man who had led soldiers through war zones. Her face drained of color. Her grip on the clipboard in her hand loosened until it fell to the floor. The reality of what she had done began to settle over her like a weight she could not lift. Downstairs. The security team approached the entrance. The general walked behind them, his gaze fixed forward, his steps measured, each movement dignified. He was a father, not just a commander. He was coming not for ceremony, but for his child. And with every step, the line between a simple classroom incident and a nationwide controversy grew wider, deeper, and impossible to ignore. The storm outside had become a storm inside, and nothing in Washington Elementary would remain the same after he crossed that threshold. General Marcus Washington stepped through the front doors of Washington Elementary with the unmistakable presence of a man who had spent nearly 3 decades commanding respect across every continent he had ever served on. His full-dress blues carried more than medals and ribbons. They carried the weight of 5 deployments, the silent grief of soldiers he had buried, and the burden of decisions that would shape entire regions of the world. But in that moment, he did not walk as a strategist or commander. He walked as a father who had just watched a video showing his 10-year-old daughter being humiliated, doubted, and publicly stripped of her dignity. His stride was calm and measured, but the depth in his eyes revealed a steady fire that no classroom wall could contain. Air Force security remained a few steps behind him, their presence quiet but unmistakably protective. Principal Karen Novak stood by the entrance, her hands clasped tightly, her breath caught between fear and respect. She greeted him with a trembling voice, calling him sir. But he moved past her with a polite nod. His focus locked on the hallway ahead. He knew which room she was in. He knew where his daughter sat, and every step brought him closer to the moment he would see her, hold her, and remind her that her truth mattered more than the disbelief that had tried to crush it. Inside room 212. The atmosphere shifted the moment the door opened. Conversations stilled. Parents rose instinctively. Even those who did not understand military protocol could sense the gravity of the moment. Sullivan, standing near her desk, felt her breath halt as she saw the 4 stars on his shoulders. Victor Lang adjusted his suit jacket, suddenly aware that every boast he had made that morning about defense bills sounded hollow in the presence of a man who had spent his life defending the nation itself. Some parents whispered to one another. Others simply stared. Even the students felt the shift in the room. The quiet awe that settled over them was not born from fear, but from respect. The kind of respect that children recognize instinctively when they see a person whose life has been shaped by service rather than ego. The general scanned the room and found Aliyah sitting in the front row. Her face pale, her eyes red from holding back tears she refused to shed in front of those who doubted her, at the sight of her father in full uniform. Her breath hitched for a moment. She seemed unable to move. Then he knelt in front of her, lowering himself to her level with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the authority he carried. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, and whispered, "I am here now. Baby girl, I am sorry I was late." She pressed her face into his shoulder, releasing a small, trembling breath that held hours of pain. That embrace told the room everything it needed to know. It told them she had spoken the truth. It told them she had been wronged. It told them that a child who had been treated as a liar was, in fact, the daughter of one of the most senior military leaders in the country. When the general rose, he turned toward Sullivan with a calm that was far more powerful than anger. His voice was low, steady, and formal. He said he understood there had been doubt about his daughter's essay. He said he understood that teachers faced challenges and that students sometimes stretched the truth. But then his tone shifted, gaining a quiet edge that carried the weight of his years in service. He said that assumptions are dangerous, especially when they are rooted in bias rather than evidence. He said that in the military, a wrong assumption can cost lives. He said that in a classroom, a wrong assumption can cost a child her sense of self. He explained that his family kept a low profile for security reasons. He explained that public records would not show his location. He said that secrecy was often a matter of safety, not pride. He said these facts did not erase the truth of his daughter's experience or the integrity of her words. Sullivan stood frozen, her face drained of color, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of her desk. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. The general's calm expression left no room for excuses. He did not raise his voice. He did not shame her. Instead, he described the nights he spent awake after Kabul bombings, the calls he made to families who had lost loved ones, and the burden of leadership that demanded humility rather than arrogance. He said he expected educators to embody the same humility. He said children deserve to be believed before they are accused. He said it is dangerous to judge a child's truth by her zip code, her clothing, or the assumptions adults project onto her. He said that his daughter had stood in that classroom with nothing but honesty, and instead of receiving the respect every child deserves, she received humiliation. Across the room, parents watched with silent astonishment. Victor Lang lowered his head, knowing his earlier smirk and dismissiveness had exposed his own bias. Some looked at the general with deep respect. Others glanced at Sullivan with disappointment and disbelief. Even the students sensed the magnitude of the moment. Logan stared at the floor, his confidence shrinking. Sophia squeezed Aliyah's hand, relieved to see justice arriving in the form of a father who carried himself with unwavering dignity. Tara Voss, who had just entered the room after hearing whispers of the commotion, paused in the doorway as the general turned his gaze toward her. It was not a threatening look. It was a look that reflected the depth of responsibility he felt for every child in the room, not just his own. It was the kind of look that forced her to confront her own words on social media, words she now regretted, without speaking. She slipped her phone into her pocket and silently deleted her post, understanding too late that the internet had already preserved it. The general turned back to Aliyah, placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and addressed the room one final time. He said that leadership begins with respect. He said respect begins with listening. He said listening begins with the humility to admit that a child's truth is not defined by her clothing, her neighborhood, or her circumstances. He said his daughter had earned the right to be believed, and he said every child in the room deserved the same dignity. As he finished, the room remained silent, the kind of silence that comes only when truth cuts through pride and exposes what has been hidden for too long. Then he guided Aliyah toward the hallway, his presence steady and protective. Behind them, Sullivan stood motionless, realizing that the moment she tore up a child's essay, she had torn through her own career. The consequences were already unfolding, and nothing she said now could stop what had begun. The general walked beside his daughter, and the school watched as the man they doubted proved with every step what true leadership looks like. Mrs. Deborah Sullivan stood trembling as the weight of her actions finally settled over her, pressing against her chest with a force she could no longer deny. The authority she had clung to for 22 years felt suddenly hollow, reduced to rubble by a moment of judgment she could not take back. For the first time, she truly saw the frightened child she had silenced, the father whose dignity she had dismissed, and the cruel assumptions she had allowed to guide her behavior. She stepped forward with slow, deliberate movements, her voice breaking before she even formed her first word. She looked directly at Aliyah, her eyes filled with remorse, and confessed that she had failed as an educator. She admitted that she had grown up in a sheltered world where she rarely encountered families whose stories challenged her expectations. She admitted that one deception by a former student years earlier had hardened her, shaping a rigid suspicion she used as a shield against vulnerability. But she said none of those excuses justified the harm she had caused. Her voice quivered as she apologized to Aliyah from the depths of a conscience awakening too late. She said she was genuinely sorry for doubting her, for humiliating her, and for letting unspoken bias guide her judgment instead of compassion. And then she cried, not to win sympathy, but because she finally understood the gravity of her mistake. General Washington listened quietly. His posture remained steady, but his expression softened slightly at the sight of a woman truly reckoning with her own actions. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out an Air Force Challenge coin, its weight symbolic, its design etched with the history of service and sacrifice. He walked toward Sullivan, placed the coin in her trembling hand, and told her he was not giving it as a reward, but as a reminder. He said growth comes not from perfect days, but from difficult ones. He said a mistake can become a turning point if the person who made it chooses to change. He said she should hold the coin whenever she felt certain of her assumptions. And remember that certainty without humility leads to harm. Sullivan lowered her head and held the coin tightly, grateful for a grace she did not expect, and aware that it did not erase the consequences she would soon face. At that moment, Logan Pierce stepped forward, his usual confidence gone. He had watched the room shift, had seen the authority he admired crumble under the truth, and had felt his own behavior reflected back at him like a mirror he was not ready to face. He looked at Aliyah with a conflicted expression, then whispered an apology. He said he was wrong to mock her. He said he did not understand what she carried, and that he should have listened. His father, Victor Lang, gripped the back of his chair with tight fingers, struck by a realization he never expected to confront. He had looked down on others for years, using titles and salaries as signs of worth, yet in the presence of the general, He saw how small those measures truly were. The contrast humbled him in silence, in the midst of this reckoning. Caden and Sophia rushed toward Aliyah. Embracing her with relief and pride, Caden raised his hand and declared that the class should form a club to protect students from unfair treatment. Sophia agreed. They said they should call it the Truth Squad. The name was simple, but the sentiment was profound. It signaled that children who had witnessed injustice were no longer willing to remain silent. Their voices carried through the room with a clarity that touched even the adults who had previously watched from the sidelines. Principal Novak stood before the class and announced immediate changes. Her voice held the steadiness of a leader confronted with a crisis that demanded bold action. She said the school would undergo a full bias audit, evaluating staff training, disciplinary patterns, and the culture that shaped their expectations of children. She said teachers would receive new guidance on how to verify sensitive information without shaming students. She said respect would become the new standard, beginning that very day. She assured parents that Washington Elementary would take responsibility, not hide behind explanations. She pledged transparency, accountability, and reform outside the classroom. The world continued to react. The video had reached 2 million views by evening. News outlets called for statements. Military families wrote messages of support for Aliyah. Civil rights groups demanded systemic changes. Community members gathered outside the school in peaceful solidarity, holding signs that read, "Believe children and bias has consequences." Reporters took positions near the sidewalks, broadcasting the unfolding story across the nation. The district responded by launching an official investigation into the incident, into the school's disciplinary practices, and into broader concerns parents had raised for years. Consequences followed swiftly. Tara Voss received notice of termination for violating social media conduct rules and displaying harmful bias. Her reaction was immediate panic, a stark contrast to the confidence she displayed online only hours earlier. She deleted her post, but screenshots had already spread. Her teaching license was placed on probation for 2 years. She attempted to shift her career into advocacy for parent rights, but the backlash met her at every turn. Victor Lang faced a different kind of reckoning. His lobbying firm received notice that a military contract worth $500,000 had been withdrawn, citing concerns about his public conduct. He realized that influence built on arrogance can crumble overnight. His family received public scrutiny that forced them to reconsider their place in the community, and compelling pressure soon pushed them to relocate. At home that evening, the Washington family gathered around their small dining table. The day had been long, painful, and transformational. Aliyah sat between her parents, leaning into her mother's shoulder, her body finally relaxing for the first time since morning. Dr. Naomi kissed her forehead and told her she had done nothing wrong. She said her bravery had exposed a truth many people were afraid to confront. She said her honesty had changed the school forever. General Washington placed a hand on his daughter's back and told her that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it stands quietly, even while tears fall. Sometimes it speaks through the strength of staying honest when others doubt you. He told her she had shown a depth of character that leaders spend a lifetime developing. Later that night, as Aliyah prepared for bed, she looked at the mirror and saw not the child who had been mocked, but the child who had revealed a system's weaknesses. She realized she had not only defended her father's honor, she had defended her own. And the story that began with humiliation had now become a story of transformation, justice, and the power of a child's truth. Washington Elementary would never be the same, and neither would she. 4 months after the storm that swept through Washington Elementary, the building stood transformed in ways no one could have imagined on that October day when a child's truth was torn in two. The hallways that once echoed with casual assumptions now carried a quieter, more deliberate respect. Teachers who had never questioned their own habits now attended weekly reflection groups. Posters throughout the school displayed Aliyah's handwritten phrase, "Believe children first, question later with respect," a motto Principal Novak had adopted as the foundation of the school's new Believe First charter. The charter became a living document, shaping conversations, guiding disciplinary actions, and reminding staff that every student arrived with a story that deserved dignity. The charter's creation had been Aliyah's idea, suggested during a small meeting with Novak and Dr. Elena Ruiz, the school psychologist who had become one of her strongest advocates. Aliyah had spoken softly that afternoon, explaining that if adults had believed her from the beginning, none of the pain that followed would have happened. Her words carried a wisdom beyond her years, grounding the reform effort in a principle so simple and so necessary that the district adopted it in pilot programs across several schools. In this new environment, Aliyah did not fade into the background. Instead, she became a symbol of resilience for her peers. Her Truth Club grew from 3 children to 60, drawing students from every grade level. They met in the library twice a week to share experiences, talk about fairness, and create projects that honored each family's story. Some students read poems, others spoke about their parents' jobs, their struggles, their dreams. The Truth Club became a sanctuary where children felt free to speak without fear of ridicule or disbelief. Teachers began attending the meetings as quiet observers, learning more about their students in 1 hour than they had learned in months of conventional instruction. For the first time in many years, Washington Elementary felt like a community rather than an institution divided by invisible assumptions. General Marcus Washington also changed in the months that followed. His confrontation with Sullivan had been a turning point not only for the school, but for himself. He had carried burdens quietly for years, pushing aside memories of combat, the tremors that woke him at night, and the emotional weight of commanding lives. But after seeing the effect of his daughter's pain, he agreed to attend therapy with military counselors. He learned to speak openly with his family about experiences he had once locked away. He visited the school occasionally in civilian clothes, quietly taking a seat in the back of the Truth Club meetings, listening to children whose courage reminded him of the soldiers he had led. He never announced his presence. He simply watched, learned, and supported. When he spoke to the club one afternoon, he told the students that truth is the beginning of leadership and that humility is its constant companion. Many children remembered his words long after the meeting ended. Dr. Naomi Washington also stepped into a new role. She began working with local parent groups, participating in workshops that addressed how implicit bias affects children's health care and education. She shared her own experiences as a Black physician navigating systems that often underestimated her. Parents listened closely, recognizing in her story a reflection of their own truths. She did not seek recognition, but her insight influenced training programs across the district and helped create new guidelines for communicating with families from diverse backgrounds. As reforms took root, consequences continued to unfold for those whose actions had sparked the crisis. Mrs. Sullivan faced a 3-month unpaid suspension, followed by a demotion to instructional aide upon returning. She completed 50 hours of mandatory bias training and underwent continuous supervision. Her reputation within the district never fully recovered. Former colleagues, once quick to defend her, now kept their distance, uncomfortable with the reminders of what unchecked assumptions could destroy. Yet she accepted these consequences with a humility she had not possessed before. She spent her time assisting younger teachers, focusing on rebuilding trust with students, and speaking at education conferences about the dangers of unexamined bias. She told audiences that a single moment of misjudgment can unravel an entire career. She said she would carry that truth for the rest of her life. Mr. Victor Lang's fall from influence was severe. His lobbying firm lost a major military contract worth $500,000, citing ethical concerns related to his conduct. The Congressional Ethics Committee launched a review into his past statements. His family faced public pressure so intense that they quietly relocated to another state, hoping for a fresh start far from the scandal that had tarnished his reputation. His son, Logan, struggled to adjust. He had been forced to confront the harm caused by arrogance masquerading as confidence. Counseling helped him understand how quickly cruelty spreads when left unchallenged. Over time, he made sincere efforts to change, seeking forgiveness not only from Aaliyah but from classmates he had dismissed in the past. As for Ms. Tara Voss, the consequences were immediate and lasting. Fired for violating district conduct rules. She watched her teaching license placed on probation for 2 years. She attempted to reinvent herself as a commentator on parent rights. But the internet never forgot her words. Screenshots of her post appeared in every article discussing the incident. She faced relentless backlash, eventually closing her accounts and withdrawing from public view. Her story became a cautionary tale about the permanence of online actions and the responsibility educators hold when speaking publicly. Through all of these transformations, Aaliyah continued to grow. Her smile returned, brighter than before. Her cornrows were always neat. Her confidence deepened with each passing week. She understood now that a child's truth carries power, even when adults doubt it. She understood that systems can change when someone brave enough tells the world where it is broken. She understood that her voice mattered, not because of her father's rank, but because she had chosen integrity over fear. Washington Elementary no longer felt like a place where children had to prove they deserved to be believed. It became a place where listening was the first act of respect, a place where truth shaped community, a place where one girl's courage changed everything, and as winter turned to spring. Aaliyah walked through the schoolyard with her head high, knowing the lessons she had inspired would outlast every headline, every meeting, every consequence. Her story began with pain, but it ended with transformation. It ended with hope, and it revealed a truth the entire community would remember for years to come. When a child speaks with honesty, the adults around her must be brave enough to listen. Thank you for listening to this story. If it spoke to you, please subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts. Your engagement helps bring these meaningful stories to others.